If you listen closely, you just might hear the sun whisper, "Draw near, draw near," to flowers below that straighten their spines and stretch their faces towards the light. And like that light which falls to the earth and covers us in a blanket of warmth, I see God leaning towards me, inviting my heart and beckoning my feet. Leaning down like a potter to clay, a mother to a crib, or a child to pray, saying, "Child, my child, draw near to me. Draw near to truth and wonder and peace. For in my bones I believe that in the beginning God came to me. And just like the sun, which day after day invites the flowers to stand and change, if you listen closely, you just might hear God say to you, "Draw near, draw near."
So I hope some of you who have taken the devotional home with you and been using it over this past month have found the images created by Sanctified Art and the poetry to be meaningful in this Advent journey. It'll continue towards the end of the month. On December 31st is the last time, so I invite you to keep on reading those devotionals. But the last line of this sticks out to me as a meaningful message for this Advent season. That if we draw close, we just might hear God say to us, "Draw near, draw near." There's this phraseology or this Hebrew imagery from the book of Proverbs, which we often think of as this sort of quid pro quo, black, white, everything's just clear as day when it comes to what it means to make wise choices. There's actually this character called Lady Wisdom, and throughout the Christian tradition and Jewish tradition, she's developed into Sophia Wisdom, and there's a lot of really good writing and poetry that follows Lady Wisdom. But there's this image of Lady Wisdom in the book of Proverbs calling up over the rooftops to the people amidst their busy lives. Calling up over the rooftops that they might hear and heed the voice of wisdom versus the voice of Lady Folly, who tries to entice us into her home to do things that we probably shouldn't. But this image is, I think, especially poignant for us during Christmas season. Image of us moving from place to place, image of us getting, I think I was at a Christmas party yesterday with someone else at a Christmas party from our church who had to go to another Christmas party that same night because they had two in the same night, and they were just thankful that they didn't overlap. I know many of us are moving from place to place and getting ready for travelers to come in. And in the midst of all that chaos, we might not be hearing that voice call over the rooftop. And this morning we have our gospel reading as this image of Mary and her pregnancy, running to Elizabeth and learning about her pregnancy. And if there's anything that teaches us or reminds us about expectation, it's pregnancy. I've not been pregnant myself, but I've been through that journey 3 times with my wife, and I know that every time it's one that we're excited for and expecting something to happen. Except, I'm also reminded that each time in our pregnancies, especially the second two, there were complications. And what's interesting is that pregnancy not only is this time of expecting, but I think that sometimes, at least for my wife, it was, we had a baby, and then it was a year and a half went, and then she totally forgot about all the complications that were involved in pregnancy, and the fear and the anxiety, and everything that went along with it. Until she was pregnant again, and then it came up again. I was like, "You didn't remember this?" And then it happened again, right? The forgetful minds. But I think that we have this image of Mary and Elizabeth in that same mindset, forgetful of what pregnancy actually entailed. Because we see it as anticipation to light the Christ candle, anticipation like these kids that are just bubbling up with energy, ready to open up their presents. Except for sometimes that anticipation and the excitement for what's to come is scary. And I want for a minute to put ourselves in the shoes of Mary and Elizabeth to remember what they were experiencing 2,000 years ago. First was Elizabeth, and Elizabeth, we don't know a lot about her. All we do know is that she was barren, that they had probably tried and tried and tried throughout their whole lives, unable to get pregnant. And Zechariah was getting old in age, he was busy in the temple, and then all of a sudden he gets a sign from God and says that his wife, who is old in years, is going to have a baby. And he didn't believe the angel that told him that, and then all of a sudden God strikes him silent. And so now, Elizabeth, this woman who's older in years, is pregnant. And her husband can't even speak or talk to her. And then she goes off into kind of solitude for 5 months. And I imagine if you were Elizabeth, there would be a number of reasons why you went into solitude. First of which, you don't want to do anything to perhaps cause what maybe happened years before, a miscarriage. Or you don't want to do anything that might make you susceptible to a problem that might come up. And then in the ancient Jewish world, being barren was a sign of your faithfulness. Remember that Proverbs, the black and white? It's this phrase called retributive justice. What you do gives you what you deserve. And so if someone were barren or something bad were to happen in their life, it was because of the sin of their lives. At least in some of the faith community it was. And so she probably secluded herself because she didn't want anything to happen. She wanted to be protected. She also secluded herself because she didn't want to do anything wrong during that time. And I imagine she was there for 5 months, incredibly faithful and praying and reading scriptures and doing all sorts of other things in that time because she wanted to make sure she would have this baby. And what was, yes, excitement, was also filled with this fear and anxiety and reminders of what had happened years before and the hopes gone lost over and over again in her life. And then you have Mary. And we think Madonna and child, picturesque image of Jesus being born, but Mary was a not yet wed teenager, likely, getting pregnant. Yes, God told them that this was going to happen, and yes, it was going to be this amazing gift to all the world, but if you, in the midst of that moment, as a teenager, not yet married but engaged, gets pregnant, I imagine you would do exactly what Mary did. Run to someone she can take comfort in. It's not interesting to me that she doesn't go quickly to Joseph. Instead, she hears in that from the proclamation of the angel right before the passage that we read that Elizabeth also was pregnant. And this miracle had happened, and what was fear and anxiety and doubt and just chaos for her, thinking, what's she going to do? Is Joseph going to stay with her? What's going to happen to me? What are my parents going to think? What's my community going to think? And all of it's just bubbling up and percolating up. And she hears Elizabeth is in the same boat as her. Elizabeth, who probably she had prayed with for her to be pregnant at some point in her life. And so she runs to be with Elizabeth. And you can see in the back of your bulletin, I invite you to look at that image that was created by the artists. A beautiful depiction of what I imagine that scene to have looked like. You have Mary with the halo, Elizabeth next to her. And they're there together, that Mary had made her way, her journey was safe, and she got to Elizabeth, and then they found solace with each other. That intimate space of being able to touch the miracle within inside of us growing and finding peace. And what was anxiety and stress turned into joy. And Elizabeth proclaims, "Blessed." And then right afterwards, after this scripture, Mary breaks out into what's known as the Magnificat, which is one of the most famous poems and songs throughout all of history. This teenage girl who's amidst doubt and fear and anxiety breaks into beautiful poetic song about what was low being lifted up and God doing something amazing in her, and what was surely chaos became somehow peaceful. Think about in your life for a minute. And think about the times when you were broken, confused, distressed. And this image, well, perhaps you and your friend were not pregnant in that time, or maybe you were, provides you an image of what that comfort looked like for you. The friend who didn't give you the answer of why this was happening to you or what was going to happen in the future, but just was with you. Who said to you the incredibly hard words that, yes, this is hard for you. This is hard for anyone. Who sat with you in the midst of the confusion and anxiety, and perhaps no words were even spoken there. But God's love in the midst of that relationship encapsulated you both. That together you were wrapped up into God's love, and then it started to bubble up, maybe not right in that moment, but moments afterwards, and you reflect on that friend, that family member, that person that you drew near to and found God's love there. A few months back, I did a sermon called Friendship as Sacrament. And I say that, what that means is God's grace meets us in the context of relationships. That almost every time I have experienced God's love, it's directly connected to experience of God's love in someone. In the context of community, in the context of someone giving themselves generously. It's in the context of relationships. But here's the thing I know, is that we are so busy during this season that we don't even think about those relationships that are going to be life-giving for us, that we're just running straight at the end game, which is, this, right? The kids so excited to open up those presents and all the things that we got to do in the midst of that, or whatever it is you do for your traditions during this season, that perhaps what we really need to do is invite that friend, that we have different circles, to coffee or to lunch during this season of perhaps not as much work, if you have the luxury of not having as much work this season. But get together with someone who is going to bring this love. And that might be your spouse, it might be a friend, it might be a family member, but are you intentionally reaching out to someone to allow God's love to meet you in that relationship? Or do you got your head straight at the goal, running as fast as you can, that you don't hear Lady Wisdom inviting you to those transformative relationships? During this Advent season, we have one day left, but we have all Christmas after to celebrate God's love and to find it within a friend or a family member. Go with intention to draw near to God amidst those who God reveals God's self within. Find that moment where you can hear God speak to you. Draw near, draw near. And you can hear God speak through the voice of kindness and love of the person sitting across from you. Let's draw near to God because God is drawing near to us. Amen.